Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and this is the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes, and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode. Jason Sherman is an entrepreneur and inventor, and he has been helping business owners start and scale their companies for more than 15 years. Going back 2 decades, Jason was always tinkering away on new inventions. In those early years, in order to create a new device or gadget, it was really difficult to design the blueprint needed for the electronics or casing. After communicating and working with manufacturing companies in Asia, which was a long ordeal in itself, more often than not, the time and money spent did not result in a positive outcome. Because then there was the daunting task of marketing and selling the device. Now, a decade later, enter the internet. Innovations such as crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter and 3D printers have become much more commonplace, and that helps these startup companies a lot. Not only that, blueprint software and 3D rendering makes whipping up a prototype as easy as baking a cake. Jason has tried his hands at both methods, and we'll discuss the differences in this episode. I'm really excited to jump into this. So, Jason, let's get right to it. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Good to have you here. So, I want to start off, just give us a little bit more about your background. Just tell us kind of how you got started being an inventor and kind of a little bit of your history in manufacturing in particular.
Sure, yeah. And, like you mentioned in my opening statement here that, I go back decades of tinkering, right? And tinkering is probably the key word here, because as kids, right, we were always given things by our parents to tinker with, whether it was blocks inside the holes that they had to fit and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But as a little kid, I always wanted to build things, whether it was like Lego sets or, like we mentioned, and like erector sets, right, which were very difficult. They were like these big metal contraptions. So I always had that tinkering bug growing up. And as I got older and I realized that I could actually create my own types of devices or gadgets or games or anything, I would just do it. I would just, get the markers out with the paper and start drawing up my ideas, and I would hand them to people and say, what do you think of these ideas? So I think I always had that the inventor's mind or the creative mind, where I just wanted to visualize something and then I wanted to build that something, no matter how hard it was to do.
Yeah. What was your very first invention?
My very first invention, as far as I can remember, and my parents still have this, was a game that was, it was basically like a board game, but it was on the floor and you would jump on it to move around instead of using your hands. And it was like a superhero game. So you would pick a superhero and then you would like use it to like jump around.
How cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. I remember using it a couple times. It was fun. But my earliest actual invention that I sold was a little device. It was very teeny. I was a teenager and there was no cell phones back then. And it was a way to jot down a phone number or a note very quickly. It was paper and pen all inside the device. So that was something I made a long, long time ago. And there were other inventions along the way, whether it was like a food item or like a book that I wrote or just things I had to figure out how to do on my own, even producing music, So taking apart computers and other gadgetry was always something that I did. Not always with great consequences or results,
right.
And sometimes costing my parents a couple dollars.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. But yeah, my dad was always a techie, so he always had the newest computer. I remember having the Apple II in the 80s and the VIC-20, the Commodore 64s. So I was always working on computers, taking them apart, putting them back together, making sure they still worked. And that's kind of like how I got into being like a techie and inventing more gadgetry.
Well, do you have any precautionary tales to share with us or lessons learned from some of the earlier experiences? Because we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of startups and creating prototypes and things like that. But I wanted to hear some of your earlier experiences.
This would kind of fast forward though if I get into this, but
okay.
Because the precautionary tales really happen before the internet revolution. Now keep in mind when I say that the internet was here because I was in college when it was invented, and when I say invented, I mean really being used. Like eBay was invented, Google was invented. Like these are when those websites launched. But if you go forward another 10 years to the mid-aughts, the mid-2000s, that's when I started to really invent actual products. Okay. And the precautionary tale comes in, it's very simple. It's really avoid inventory at all costs. That's really my main piece of advice, is just avoid inventory.
That's kind of self-explanatory. It makes perfect sense because, boy, I'm sure you could waste some money on some... Yeah, I'm sure you could waste some money on some inventory if you weren't careful.
I didn't know back then. I didn't know. And the amount of money my brother and I, my father and I, we spent on inventory, we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. And then realizing, oh, now I have a basement full of these boxes of this product and I have to sell it.
Exactly.
And it's not easy.
Right.
So yeah, I learned early on to stop inventory, no more inventory.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that evolution, because it's a different world now than it was when you first started, with the onset of some technologies that have been really helpful. So kind of give us an idea of like, what were the challenges back then and how are they being solved, or, now, how are they getting better?
It's like night and day. It's the equivalent of, a horse and buggy and then an automobile or a rocket ship. Back then you had to manually do everything. And when I say manually, I mean, you had to first obviously come up with the idea. You had to write it all out in an outline explaining exactly what it did. You would have to create some sort of blueprint or some sort of mock-up of like what it would look like. And from there, you had to find somebody, which typically was in China, because that was the place to find somebody, unless you knew like a mechanical engineer from a local university, which I did occasionally find one, but not often. You had to deal with the lack of communication because the language barrier between here and Asia, the time difference between here and Asia, both of those were a huge challenge. So if you would ask a question, like what kind of, mold do you have to create for this product? You have to wait 24 hours to get a response. And then when you get that response, you were asleep and then you had to wake up and answer them. So just to get a couple of questions and answers took a week.
Sure.
And that's just one of the steps. The next step is, do you even want to work with this person? So like you had to figure that out through a week-long conversation and then have to do it all over again 20, 30 times with 20 different people until you finally found the right one. So it really took months to find somebody to work with just because of the time and communication and language barriers.
Right.
It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
I know that there have been times when I said, someone should invent something that does this. There's some sort of thing that you wish you had, some sort of gadget or some sort of tool that you wish you had. And you think, I should invent that. I could get rich doing this. I could really become a millionaire if I just invent this. But I wouldn't know where to start. And I am heavily entrenched in manufacturing and have a lot of contacts out there. I would not know where to start. And so can you kind of give us an idea, like what is the general process of, so the first thing you do is probably have the idea. And then where do you go from there?
Right. So like I mentioned, it's the outline, the blueprint, the mock-up. You want to definitely have that. You need to visualize what this idea is. From there, back then, this is, 2000, 5, 6, 7, I would show people. I would say, like, here's this idea, here's this gadget. For example, here's one silly idea I had. It was an air filter for your desk, but it was in the shape of a fake plant.
Oh.
So like, imagine offices all across America. Instead of having like a clunky, ugly air filter on their desk, it looks like a plant.
Okay. Interesting.
So it looks like or a flower, whichever one you chose. So I would show this mock-up to people. I called it like the Aero plant or something. And then they could look at it and say, oh, it's a good idea. I like it. I would pay X amount of dollars for it. So they tell you I would pay $30 for it. Or what if you made it not like a plant, but maybe look at like a speaker or whatever idea they had. So basically it's get your idea out to people, get feedback from them, and get a price point as to what they'd be willing to pay. Those are 3 really important things going into it, because
this
if you're
is
getting
early market research, right?
Early market research.
Yeah.
If you're not getting validation, then why are you even building it? Right? So taking that information, the feedback, and then of course the daunting task that you mentioned in the beginning, which is then getting some sort of prototype. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to get a prototype in the early 2000s because I already mentioned how long it takes to get a hold of somebody.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you have to like send them all this stuff that you showed people, right? And then you have to wait for them to kind of course, ask you 50 questions because they're going to ask you a lot of questions. Does it plug in? Does it take batteries? What color is it? What kind of material do you want to use? What kind of air filters will it take? Whatever the questions are. And you're like, I don't know. I got to figure all this out. So then you got to figure all that out. And that takes time, right? Because then you have to do research. You got to go online, and there was the internet. So you could do a little research, and you have to kind of become a mechanical engineer. Like, well, should I use batteries, and should I use power, and should I, what kind of plastics and all kind of things. So you do your research, of course. Don't just say yes, yes, yes to whoever asks you questions. Look it up.
Right.
Use the internet, right?
Well, now we have information overload, whereas back in those early days, you probably didn't have that, and you had to kind of figure out some things yourself and do your own kind of beta tests with just random people, I guess. I know that's hard. I was really interested to talk to you, Jason, because we've done a couple of podcasts about having a startup and those kinds of challenges. And I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think I told you that I interviewed some really cool people at M-Hub in Chicago. And they kind of do this. They kind of offer, it's kind of like an incubator, and they offer young entrepreneurs or small startups the opportunity to come in and use their 3D printer, for example, to create a prototype. And they also have access to marketing professionals and that sort of thing. Is this something that's becoming a little bit more common out there to help young startups and young entrepreneurs get their ideas off the page and into at least a prototype?
It's a great question, because I've lived through both worlds.
Yeah.
I lived through the world where I struggled to get my products made, and we haven't even talked about the next part of building a product before all of this great innovation, right? We're now fast forwarding into the great innovations.
Well, you can go back to that. You can tell us what that was like. Yeah.
All right, but we can touch a little bit on this too, because it was really interesting to me being in the tech startup space in particular. Now, this is actually cool to talk about because it's halfway between the primitive days and the great innovative days, right? This is in the middle now, so we're not fast forwarding too much. We're getting to like the 2010 to 2016. Those 6 years right there, I was really hot in the tech industry with startups, pitching. I was a journalist. I was really kind of traveling a lot and seeing a lot of technology, and I saw 3D printers kind of emerge out of the ether and start printing a little Yoda head or a little screwdriver or, some sort of design or a logo. And I was like, ooh, this is really cool technology.
Sure.
But they were like $5,000 when they came out. They were really expensive, or $3,000, $4,000. So like, it was really difficult to buy one of these things and use it. So you did see it at like an incubator or like an office that would say, hey, come in, pay $250 and we'll print out a prototype of your gadget, right? So I did see that kind of emerging, but I do have to say back then there wasn't a lot of utility. And that was the not the problem, but that was kind of, I mean, this happens with every technology, right? Smartphones came out, cameras weren't that good. That's why people wonder why camera-based apps didn't really do well until later on. Well, I was in the middle of it. In 2013, I built Instamore, and the video technology was really lagging. So, I'm kind of going on a tangent there, but that just gives you an example. Every technology starts out, look at internet. We had to do the dial-up modem, and it took forever to get on America Online, right? Well, 3D printers are the same thing. They would print these very basic, like something like this, like a little Android or something,
Right.
and that was it. You couldn't use it for anything unless you were able to design something in like a blueprint with like some gears or something that had some utility. But again, difficult stuff, kind of away from the beginning of 3D printers.
Right.
So
and it made me think when you used that example about the dial-up internet. I do remember that. And I also remember the fax machine. Like I remember when the fax machine came out and we were like, wow, it only takes 45 minutes to send one page, but still that was, and it was on that curly paper, that horrible curly paper.
Absolutely.
And, but it was still faster than putting it in the mail.
Of course.
And waiting for it to get there. So these little innovations that come along, I mean, now we can send something in a split second to the other side of the world through the internet or through email or a text message or something like that. It's pretty remarkable how far we've come. Just in our lifetimes. You and I have probably been out there about the same amount of years. And yeah, I mean, just to see what we've been through and, we thought the fax machine was the greatest invention of all times. And now hardly anybody uses that anymore.
It's all about emails and text.
Exactly. There's so much better innovation now. So what are some of the other problems? Is building the prototype really the biggest challenge? Because some say once you have a product, you still have to sell it. I mean,
I was going to say that
a product is no good if it's
it.
not in the hands of your target audience. So is that the next challenge that people have to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge is marketing and selling your product. Absolutely, hands down, always will be. And the reason why is because anybody can build a product. If you sit there long enough or you hire a team and you pay enough money or anything that you do, any gadget you want to build or any app you want to build, anybody can do it.
Right.
But not everybody can sell that product. And it's obvious when you have these big companies with billions of dollars launching platforms or launching products, and they go out of business within a year because they just didn't capture the audience that they were intending to capture. So I always say marketing is way more difficult than building something. It just is.
I think that's true no matter what you're talking about. I mean, I publish books. I mean, I can write the best book in the world, but if it doesn't get in the hands of the target audience, it doesn't matter. It's just going to sit on your own shelf.
Same goes for your music album.
Oh, sure.
The movie that you make, the art you draw, anything creative or anything that you create, if people don't listen to it, watch it, pay for it, use it, then it doesn't matter. It's out there, but no one's listening to it.
And the first step is they have to know it's out there. I mean, and then you still have to sell it to them and make them think that it's going to help them in some way or solve a problem or make them happy. So yeah, that's a big
hard
obstacle. It is very difficult. It's not so easy as people think, but
people need to really pay attention to this, right? This is the part I think of this entire episode that people need to, if they're going to listen to something here and they're going to really put it into their head, they need to realize that no amount of money can buy you what it is you want in terms of target audience and marketing and sales, because it's just not true. It's all about the messaging, the interaction that you have with the people, the feedback you're getting, listening to them, and of course, iterating, right? Because if your market is telling you they want something, even if it's a product that you built, like say you built this new mouse, and the mouse doesn't have a button on it that they want, but they keep telling you they want this button that does this thing. And you say, I don't care. I know better.
Right.
You're not going to sell the mouse.
Exactly.
You need to listen to them.
That's right.
So listen to your market. It's very important.
I think that's fantastic advice for sure. Now, I'm really intrigued to hear from you about this concept of crowdfunding and with things like Kickstarter. And we talked about this briefly beforehand when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today. And I'm really curious to hear about this because I mean, one of the other challenges with getting a new innovation out on the market is it costs money.
Everything costs money.
We're not all independently wealthy, right? I'm certainly not.
Yeah. Everything costs a lot of money to do, and this goes back to the primitive days when we were not completely finished with that topic. And the second half of that is how much it costs back in the early days to build a product, because now we're talking getting past the communication and time difference, right? That was the first part. The second part was creating your outlines, your mock-ups, all the information you need, getting the materials kind of ready for a manufacturer. Okay. So let's say you've gotten the manufacturer, you went through 20 people, you went through a couple months, you figured out who you're working with, and now they need things from you. They need this information, the blueprints. Okay. Now they can take what you sent them and they can design an actual prototype for you using molds. Back then, there were no 3D printers. So a mold was like, some sort of either metallic or plastic kind of, it was shaped in the way that your product was. Mm-hmm. And it was made specifically for you. And it might've been made out of wax or ceramic or something, but either way, they had to make this for you and they would charge you for that mold. Right. And they could only use it for your product. So this was the first step, the mold, for the die-cast machine, right? To put it into the die-cast machine and it would start knocking these prototypes out for you. Mm-hmm. Then you had to pay for the material for the prototypes to be cut out for you, right? And then they had to be dried and painted, and that was an additional cost. And then, of course, there was packaging, there's additional cost, and then you had to create a nice, pretty box with graphics and design. That had to be printed and folded and packaged. That was an additional cost. And then you had to have all of that shipped to you from Asia. And that was an additional cost.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I mean, it was a very long, tedious process. And the worst part of all is when you receive all of this and there's a problem with it.
Oh no.
Either it doesn't work, or the packaging was wrong, or the graphics didn't come out right as you thought they would, or they didn't communicate with you during the process. It was more like, here's the job, they're doing the work, they're shipping it to you, and they'd send you pictures of the final product so you can see pictures, but as you can imagine, it's the same as a dating app, catfishing. You think it's going to be this, and then you get it in the mail and it looks like that, so a lot of problems. And the problem with that is that once you get them, there's no going back. You can't get a refund. You have to keep what you have. Some manufacturers were willing to work with you, but they don't care because they're dealing with people on volume. You're buying 100 tchotchkes and they're making 100,000 tchotchkes for big companies. So you're just like a small fish that could potentially turn into a whale if you started selling these products, but they don't really care about you, the little guy. So That was a big frustration for me back then.
In walks things like a Kickstarter and crowdfunding. So how does that work, and how can it help entrepreneurs and startups?
So when I first saw Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and the other crowdfunding campaigns, I was like, whoa, this is so cool. I can finally raise money for things that I want to create or build without having to go through this whole process anymore.
Right.
Because what it is it's a way for you to validate your idea before doing everything I just talked about. You just have to show what it looks like, which means you can maybe use a 3D program to 3D render what it would look like. Mm-hmm. Some catchy graphics, a cool video, usually pretty funny video, and perks. Like, what are people getting for their donation? Whether it's a t-shirt, some stickers, the actual physical product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I just feel like it was like a great innovation was Kickstarter. And I did fund one of my films. I made a documentary that was funded by Kickstarter. So that was a way for me back in 2015 to raise the funds I needed. And I finally got a chance to use Kickstarter. And I was like, oh, wow, it worked. And I raised more than I wanted for the movie. And I was able to make the movie. And it won awards and got distribution. So I really think that Kickstarter helped a lot in that respect. But along the way, as you mentioned earlier, I mentored a lot of entrepreneurs, and I would find entrepreneurs with physical products. Mm-hmm. And I would say, you need to put this on Kickstarter. Of course, they didn't know how to. So I would help them figure out what kind of design they needed to come up with of their product, the kind of graphics, the website, the perks needed, how to kind of lay it all out and really help them kind of craft the right message to people. And that's only, again, half the battle, like we mentioned, right? We still have to sell it. So you still got to get journalists to write about your Kickstarter and your product. You need social media to be pushing out your product, buy this product, but it's a really cool way to validate your product and get it sold before you make it. And that's really the genius in Kickstarter.
I really like that concept. So give us an example. So you set up a page. So say you have something you want to sell. I mean, let's use a physical product as an example. And
I can give you a great example.
Okay, great, yeah. And then walk us through like how you set it, how you market it, and also what kind of perks would be appropriate for that specific product. Give us
easy. Here's a great example. I worked with this girl in the city who invented this foldable bicycle helmet.
Oh, cool.
This was 10 years ago or whatever. And it was, to me, very innovative because I had a bicycle and I had a helmet. Anybody out there who rides bikes has these big, clunky helmets that you have to carry around with you. Well, hers was foldable that you can literally put into your bag. And it was still, when you unfolded it, still very durable as a regular helmet.
Okay.
So I saw immediately potential. But she didn't know how to build this thing, how to market it, how to create it. So I helped her out. I said, listen, you don't need to make this helmet. Get some cardboard or some sort of material and cut it with a box cutter and create this kind of prototype. What would it actually look like if it was real?
Mm-hmm.
And so she did that. She kind of glued it together so it would be able to fold and unfold. And then she took it to a place like the one you're talking about and got it 3D printed because she brought it to them. And they were able to design it again for her and do a 3D print. So she had a 3D printed prototype that actually folded and actually unfolded. Whether or not it was going to help you if you fall, not so much. But it was a good prototype.
Right.
She used that prototype to make a really good video that I helped her shoot at the time. So showing people on bicycles, showing people falling down safely, of course. And then it was all about statistics. This is where you want to get people, right? Here's how you asked, how do you get their attention? Statistics, data. 74% of people on bicycles die each year because they don't have a helmet on. The amount of people who don't wear helmets in urban areas are this percentage. This many accidents happen, so and so. And you just keep putting these statistics all because of bicycle helmets. And then you show people clumsily holding their bicycle helmet while they're trying to navigate a city with a briefcase and a coffee and falling down. The coffee gets knocked down and the helmet falls down. And you got to show the problem that you're solving. And then show quickly, folded in your purse and drinking your coffee and happy along your way, right? So it was all about showing the problem, the solution, and how this would help without building an actual helmet.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how you do it. You want to show the product being used. You want to show statistics and data as to the problem you're solving, show the problem you're solving, and why it's so unique and innovative. And people will flock to it. Once you have all that, you want to reach out to journalists, bloggers, influencers in the industry that you're in. So people that write for bicycle magazines, people who write for health and fitness magazines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Find people specifically for your niche and then target them and say, hey, I have this new product. I'm willing to give you one for free if you write a review about it. Right. And at that point, you might want to have a couple extra 3D printed ones that you can send to people. Right. So say, hey, it's not functional. Don't wear it. I mean, you can wear it, but don't, it's not safe because it's not made of the fiberglass or, whatever titanium we're going to use for this. But you can definitely open it up, put it on, try it out, take pictures with it, and let us know what you think overall. And we'll give you a free one when it actually launches on Kickstarter, that kind of thing. And people are mostly going to say yes if you offer a free product to them.
Sure. And
that's pretty much how you do it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so then people just out in the universe, in the Kickstarter universe, will donate $5, $10, $50, whatever, $1, I guess. Maybe you set a limit or set a price that they donate, or maybe they donate whatever, and you set a goal, right? Don't you set a goal and then
you set a goal for like $10,000,
right?
And like you said, $1, $5, $10, $20, $25, $50, and each one of those gets you a different perk. So 1 gets you a thank you, 5 gets you a thank you on social media, 20 might get you a t-shirt, 50 gets you the helmet maybe, 100 gets you 2 helmets, 200 or 300 might get you a helmet, a t-shirt, maybe a gadget for your bicycle, and then maybe 500 gets you like VIP access to a special event that you're hosting. Just got to come up with ideas to get them interested.
Right, but the perks are part of it, right? You can't just put your thing out there and say, give me money.
No, you have to give, they're buying something from you.
They want something for their donation. It's not just here, we want to support this. Maybe some people do it for that reason.
Yeah, some people do. Some family and friends usually do.
Yeah, well, sure. That makes perfect sense. And so that's really good. So once somebody they have the money now, and they've done a successful Kickstarter campaign, for example, and they raised, we'll just use your arbitrary $10,000. They probably need more than that. But then what do? Do they go to a manufacturer? Do they reach out to manufacturers and say, hey, can you produce this for me? They don't have to start a manufacturing facility, right?
Right. That's a great question. And I would say the answer would be that you really want to have that figured out beforehand. And if you don't, then you're not doing it right. Because historically what's happened on Kickstarter, and this is pretty well known if you look it up, is a lot of people launch these campaigns and raise millions of dollars, but were not able to produce the item. And they just kept the money. So
now
you need to figure that out.
That doesn't seem...
well, because
that's not good PR.
let's say you came up with this idea for something. It's an electronic gadget, and it's very difficult to create. And they think they can build this thing, so they raise $1 million. They were looking for 25,000. They raise $1 million, and then they realize, well, we can't build this thing.
Oh no!
we reached out to 10 manufacturers, and they all say they can't build it. We thought we could, but we can't. It's going to cost way more money than we thought. And maybe they give refunds back, maybe they don't. But the point is you need to figure out manufacturing while you're raising money on Kickstarter. So in the terms of the bike helmet, you want to reach out to bike helmet companies. You want to reach out to plastics companies. You want to reach out to any factory or manufacturing company that can create something similar. Maybe it's not a helmet. Maybe it's a lunchbox company or trapper keeper company, something that folds, that folds. Think outside the box. What else folds that's plastic? Well, that's who I'm going to contact. It's not necessarily going to be a helmet company. It's just going to be something that folds. So that's really what you want to do.
Are general manufacturers interested in projects like this? I mean, I'm asking this out to the audience too. Maybe you guys can come back to us and let us know. Do you generally entertain pitches of this type when you're producing your own products? Do you are you open to pitches from somebody that might have just an interesting idea, and maybe is there a partnership that happens, or how does that work once it gets to the manufacturing stage?
Right. So are you asking if manufacturers take pitches, or if I take pitches, or both?
Yeah, like if I pitched a plastics manufacturer about creating a bicycle helmet, how likely is that manufacturer to create my product while they're creating their own products or their own things that they're working on?
So based on my experience in creating actual products, I've had success locally. And I would recommend finding a local manufacturer that you can physically visit their factory with your product and show it to them and say, I want to build this. I'm local. I can only afford 100 of them. But if it does well on Kickstarter, you'll be my manufacturer.
Yeah.
And that's how you want to do it. And most factories, if they're near you, that you can 30-minute drive, you can drive to them. There's no reason why they're going to say no to you because they do mostly deal with large volume companies. They already have their business. So you're kind of going to be like, not a charity case, but you're kind of like, okay, I'll do something fun on the side with this guy or this girl because why not? I'm already successful. My company's already successful. This will be fun. And if I can help this person make their product, and of course you have to pay the money that they're going to charge you to make the product, right? They're not doing it for free. It's just potentially another client for them. They might end up getting you. What if it sells $1 million worth and now they have this huge contract?
Right, exactly. I think that's really interesting, and it just occurred to me while I was listening to you talk about that. industries that are in trouble, like for example, during the pandemic, there were quite a few manufacturing industries that really struggled. Some were just fine and some thrived, but there were some that struggled, and maybe that's an opportunity for them to keep their workers working, to keep the machines running, because that's always important in a manufacturing facility. So maybe that's an actual opportunity for some manufacturing facilities to take on projects like that for young entrepreneurs, not only for good PR, but also for, like you said, it might be a great opportunity for them. There's a chance it could be that, but also just a way to keep things running, keep the machines running during times when it's the off season or it's a slack time or something. That could be an option if you seek out those kind of manufacturers.
And that happened, right? We saw companies that were maybe making lawn chairs all of a sudden making plastic shields for masks.
Right.
There was a local company that here in Philadelphia that I saw in the news. They were a manufacturing company that built something specific, maybe fences, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they pivoted to creating the plastic shields for shopping grocery stores for the checkouts.
Right.
They pivoted because they weren't getting a lot of fences at the time, but they got a lot of plastic shield orders. So it's all about pivoting, seeing a gap in the market, potentially repurposing your machinery at your factory to create a different product that is needed at the moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many different examples we can probably give about this, right? And that's really, you're right. It's survival, it's pivoting, it's seeing a need in the market, finding a gap in the market. Is your facility capable of manufacturing this other product by just repurposing some of the machines a little bit, changing your processes a little bit? And yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really smart move for any company who does that.
Yeah, I would think so too. What is your best advice for new, I won't say young, because sometimes you think of a product when you're old or a little bit older, but for new entrepreneurs or new inventors who really want to jump into manufacturing their great innovation or great idea? What's your best advice for them?
This is the same advice that I've been giving for 20 years. It's in my book. It's in my course. It's in my podcast. It's on my website. It's coming out of my head during my dreams is to always, number one, validate your idea before you build anything. Meaning, tell 20 people you know about this idea and see what they say. Jot it down in a note, like their feedback. So get feedback from people. Make sure they want your product. From there, you want to gain a little bit more visibility about it. Maybe do some mock-ups, maybe draw some diagrams, maybe an outline. Ask more people on social media, maybe pay people an Amazon gift card, $5, $10 to fill out your survey, get more information. Really, it's more about gathering information versus building. From there, you want to build a minimum viable product, whether it's a prototype or a web app or a mobile app, something very, very, very simple. Mm-hmm. The simpler, the better. So if you're building, VR goggles, maybe take a regular pair of glasses and figure out a way to make them into a cheap version of your VR goggles without spending a lot of money. So try to minimize your expenses, but still provide a valuable product to people that they can hold in their hands. It's tangible, they can use. And then guess what? You repeat that loop. Get the validation for that physical product, get the feedback for that physical product, get survey results for that product, figure out the price point, figure out the colors, figure out the UI, UX, the user interface, user experience. What is it like for them to hold this product in their hand or use this product? That's really the best advice I can give anybody is just get feedback, get validation, put a product in their hands. Don't spend a lot of time or money doing either, because the less time and money you spend, the better, because you'll find that if you do the process and you find that nobody wants this thing, guess what? You're not going to waste a year to 10 years of your life and tens of thousands of dollars on this product. Move on to your next idea.
Right.
And now you learned how to get the information from people. Now you know how to do it.
Yeah, that brought up another question I had for you. Just realistically, what should people expect as far as a timeline? Like if you have an idea today, should you expect that to be a product by next year or in 10 years, as you said, or next month? I mean, what's a realistic timeline for people to really think about it? I know it depends on the product, it depends on the market, etc., but maybe a range of low.
And it's even more than that, actually, because let's talk about someone like Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla. They would famously sleep for 3 to 4 hours a day, right? And they were just churning out their inventions overnight, really. So you could be like one of those guys and just not sleep and get your idea out there very quickly. So it's actually up to the person on how quickly the results are. I always tell people, for example, I have a course, it's called Startup Essentials. It teaches you how to do what you're saying, right? And the course is about 3.5 hours of short lessons. If you sit there for 3.5 hours without moving, except for coffee or tea or whatever, bathroom breaks, do the course. You can finish it in one day and start working on your idea and maybe have something tangible in a couple days.
Yeah.
So like, it's not about the length of time it takes to get to a certain point. It's about how much time you're willing to commit and dedicate to getting the results you want and really putting yourself out there on the streets and talking to people. Because that's the key, is talking to the people or people around you to get it. And so the question really comes down to, how long does it take you to talk to people and show them what you want to build to get feedback? Is it 2 days? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 2 months? Are you being lazy? Are you binging Netflix instead of talking to people? Are you sleeping instead of talking to people? Are you busy with personal life instead of talking to people? Well, then it's going to take you that much longer.
Right.
It's up to you. It's up to you to do the work.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I guess that's an impossible question to answer. So, as you know, this podcast is all about the future of manufacturing, and I'm just curious to know, from your perspective and the experience that you have with manufacturing, what do you think the factory of the future looks like?
Oof, no humans.
I mean, I hear a lot of people say that these days.
Maybe like there's George Jetson in the top of the thing pushing the one button. Maybe that's, you have the one button guy at the top turning off the factory or turning it on. But I mean, realistically, with artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, there's so many processes today that are being, like, cars are being built by big robots.
Sure.
There are everything is robotic and artificial intelligence. I mean, anything you can put a human to task a human with, you can easily replace with a robotic or artificial intelligence unit. And especially with, factories and like building repetitive tasks, so I think that the factory of the future is really going to be automatic. It's going to be autonomous. It's going to be artificial intelligence running algorithms to figure out, is the output the right number of widgets per day? And do we have to, add another robot over here to make this process run a little faster? And we talked a little bit about 3D printing, and there was something that I feel like we didn't say that merits, at least in my opinion, some attention, is we think of 3D printers as a device that can create prototypes. And for example, there is this really cool, I saw this maybe a couple years ago, actually, so we're already past it, a 3D printer that allowed you to print the parts to build its own 3D printer.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a 3D printer that you can build the parts to build that same exact 3D printer. And I thought that was amazing, because now wait a minute, I can build 3D printers.
I mean, that's pretty exciting and pretty interesting and bizarre all at the same time. I mean, I've seen 3D printers that are building jet engines. It's unbelievable what is happening with that technology, and that is definitely a part of the future. But I would have to argue with you a little bit. I think there still have to be some humans in the factory, because things break. Things like robotics break. You still need people to design the machines. You still need people to repair the machines, maintain the machines, and to program them to do what you want them to do. Although there are technologies like machine learning, of course, we talk about this all the time, where eventually they do learn what they're supposed to do. But I'm not exactly convinced that we're going to do away with humans completely. But I do think we're moving toward a lot more robotics and a lot more automation. So,
well, I mean, let's put it this way.
I could be wrong.
Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan and like a lot of other famous sci-fi authors have always mentioned that when AI and robots finally take over the tedious, repetitive tasks.
Sure.
of
Yeah,
humans,
those for sure. Yeah.
we're finally left with the ability to be more creative and engage in the arts and music and the things that robotics and AI can't really do because they don't have that kind of brain, you know? So I think what's going to happen here is that the repetitive, everyday, tedious tasks that humans just don't want to do anymore, like flipping a burger or building a car, is going to be left to the robots. And then, like you said, we're going to be the ones in charge of how those things operate, the creativity behind it, like how the cars look, you know, how the food is prepared, the recipes, the ingredients. We're going to figure that stuff out, and we're going to feed all that for the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, to create for us. It's going to be more of a managerial position for humans, I believe, more supervisory capacity and creative capacity, and then the robots will just do all the dirty work for us.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that's a great way to put it. So is there anything else that you want to add? Is there anything that you can tell us about getting a new innovation out there, or how that's going to change manufacturing? The more people like you who are out there inventing new products and putting them out there to be manufactured, just wrap it up for us and tell us anything else maybe that we should know.
I think that a lot of people are afraid to tell people their idea because they might think it's not a good idea. You know, they keep it to themselves. And I think that's not a good way to look at it. I think anybody out there who has an idea, whether it's, like we mentioned, any of the industries, doesn't matter what the idea is, tell people about it. And you might be surprised to find that not only people like your idea, but they actually want your idea. And do the steps, right? Don't skip the steps. If you have a lot of money to burn, don't waste it. Instead, use it wisely because, you know, as we mentioned, it's very difficult and expensive to get your idea out there. So save your money for that.
Right.
Instead, focus on the iteration, the feedback, the customer, the market. Figure out the kinks first before building anything. And don't be afraid to tell people about it because, and also don't forget to research to make sure it doesn't already exist, because a lot of people come to me with ideas. I do a quick Google search and there's 4 of his or her product already in existence.
I mean, if you think it's a good idea, there's a chance somebody else out there thought that too. But maybe then you can make a different integration of it or make it do something to make it better.
Build a better mousetrap is what they always say.
Build a better mousetrap. Yeah, exactly.
That's where that came from, right? So, you know, figure out a better way of creating the product.
Yeah, very interesting. Great stuff. I enjoyed this conversation so much. Thanks so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
And we're actually human. We're not artificial robots, right? We're people.
Yeah, we're still human. I think it still takes humans to do podcasts and have conversations and exchanges of ideas. And that's
exactly.
Hopefully that will never be replaced by a robot.
See that? We can't be replaced. See that? We're in a good place.
Exactly. Thanks so much for being here. And
thanks for having me. Okay. It was a blast.
Great. Thanks. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.